have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hammond, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, or City of Demons, depending on who you want to ask. And we are internationally syndicated, starting with our home base, Late Night in the Midlands, as well as their terrestrial affiliates, as well as Black Swamp Digital Radio, both in the United States. As I said, our international network is Deprogrammed Radio Network in the United Kingdom, as well as their terrestrial affiliates in London and Leeds and growing. A couple announcements. First of all, the archives are finally ready on the web, on the website, drjradiolive.com. That is drjradiolive.com. And remember, folks, every social media account is the same. That is Dr. J Radio Live, the name of the show. Things from Minds, Patreon, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, whatever you can imagine under the sun, it's there. Also, another announcement, we will not be doing a live show tomorrow because it is my birthday and I'm going to be out celebrating, but we are having another Friday flashback, which would be my 5th interview ever that I've ever done, which would be dated April 18th, 2013. Now, let's talk about today's guest and show. First of all, this guest, me and him have been friends for, 6 years, end of 2012. Fantastic person. He knows so much information about so many topics. He also runs the Exopolitics Institute. And ever since QAnon, for those of you who don't know who QAnon is, you literally must be living under a rock. QAnon has been leaving crumbs, so-called crumbs, tweets, also posts on 8chan, QChan, and I don't know what the current one is now, but it's QAnon.pub. 3 different times this person has proven they are with Donald Trump. And Sarah Sanders had to deal with questions from the mainstream leftist social communist media when asked about QAnon, when Donald J. Trump was in Florida. And every time he saw a QAnon shirt, a hat, or someone holding up a sign, he would point to it, acknowledging it. Clearly, the president knows. POTUS number 45 knows. If you recall, the first week of September, we did a very first update since I've been back on air with the one and only, now I'm going to say the guest's name, that way I've given you enough time to check out the social media, and that is the one and only Dr. Michael Salla, PhD, live from Hawaii. Dr. Salla, welcome to the show.
Aloha, Dr. J. Glad to be here.
It's always a pleasure to speak to you, whether it be about what are we going to do once extraterrestrials arrive. For instance, your Exopolitics Institute. I don't think very many people look beyond that. But now we have something that's been happening that is probably very, very important to the extent that people need to understand that this is us versus the deep state. For instance, the InfoWars World Affairs expert Joel Skousen comes on all the time and reminds us it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. It's either deep state versus establishment politicians. And that's why I think QAnon is so important. Why do you think QAnon is so important, unless you think the reasons I said so are?
I think there's a number of reasons why the QAnon information is very important. There has always been a tension between the mainstream media and the alternative media. It's been building up as digital communications has grown, as social media has grown. But what we see now is the kind of culmination of that deepening tension, where the deep state really tried to remove the alternative media as a legitimate source for people to go to get information. And so what we have now with QAnon is pretty much kind of like open warfare now, really, a communications warfare between those who really do go to alternative sites to get information which is not skewed or in any way tainted by the deep state, which is always pushing particular agendas, and the mainstream media has been completely compromised. But with QAnon and the Trump administration, we are seeing now that the mainstream media has been pointed out as false news. That term false news was originally brought up and used in the mass media to taint alternative media sites, websites like my own, radio programs like your own, to kind of taint us and put us out of existence by basically saying that, we put out false news. But what QAnon and the Trump administration has done is to make millions of people aware that the problem is the mainstream media, that it is the mouthpiece for the deep state. It's deeply compromised, as QAnon has pointed out again and again, in terms of how the mainstream media really just pushes this this narrative that the deep state wants out there. And that, to me, is really the biggest contribution of QAnon, just by kind of like showing that there is this false narrative that the deep state is always trying to push on people, but there's a alternative news narrative which actually people, if they go to that, they're going to get the truth through that. And of course, QAnon has become a voice, has become in itself an alternative news site. So, people often just go there to get, what's the latest news from QAnon? So, to me, that's the biggest contribution. There are many others in terms of the way QAnon has given us information on a whole host of issues, but that's the big one.
And of course, you probably remember after Trump was in Florida, I don't know if he was campaigning for the governor or another senator, but that is when the very next day in the White House briefing room, Sarah Sanders was asked from the left stream media, for instance, people like from CNN, ABC, MSNBC, what do you think about this right-wing conspiracy theory involving pedophiles and Satanists? What a way for the mainstream media to deflect what's really happening. It's almost as if they've never read a single post. You recall that press briefing, right?
Well, that's right. And it was very interesting to see how Sarah Sanders kind of like sidestepped the issue in terms of not directly saying anything to confirm or deny Trump's relationship with QAnon, but just to kind of like make this, this statement about, the White House doesn't support any extremist organization out there. So, that was not directly answering the question, and kind of like really teasing the mainstream media in terms of, well, what does Trump think in terms of QAnon? And I think this is part of the process of the people behind QAnon is that they want people to ask questions. They want the mainstream media to ask questions, because I think the big thing here is that within the mainstream media, probably only 5% of those that are journalists and editors are corrupt operatives of the deep state. The rest of the mainstream media, 95%, they just kind of follow the lead of what the kind of deep state media assets impose on the rest of the mass media. So, if you're an aspiring journalist and you want to get ahead, you're not going to buck what the editor tells you, or if you're an editor, you're not going to go against what the chief editor tells you. And so you kind of get moved, or you kind of get directed down a certain path where only certain stories will be covered, or only certain sources will be covered. So, QAnon is trying to kind of like get people to ask questions to find out that, there is a process underway where, these talking points, and QAnon has pointed this out on several occasions, 4 a.m. in the morning, a lot of the mainstream media operatives, they get their talking points sent to them by the deep state, and those operatives, they will just push that agenda for the rest of, that day, in terms of what the talking points are, and they just push that. That's the narrative that the deep state wants out there, because this, I believe, people talk about, well, what is the true power basis of the deep state? You talk about international finances, banking, you talk about politics, You talk about religious institutions. What is the real power behind the deep state? And I think it's control of the mass media. And, we in the alternative media are a big threat to that. And QAnon is part of that process.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of speculation comes from Q, who he actually is. And before we jump into that and when he started, and then of course we're going to move into the most recent posts, you recall that recent briefing with Donald Trump with CNN's Jim Acosta. And that right there just shows, again, for people who've watched the beginning to end of that, what the deep state is trying to do. I mean, if they're the ones accusing the president of dividing the country, but in their own questions, they were the ones dividing the country. And what Jim Acosta did in that briefing room, even though we weren't talking about Q, just goes to show how horrible this mainstream media is, the establishment deep state media is, when it comes to someone who is potentially the only person who can save this country right now.
Yes, the deep state definitely has a lot of assets, and I would include Jim Acosta as part of its assets that are trying to kind of like really skew the public awareness away from issues that are really important to these kind of really trivial kind of issues that for a lot of bread and butter kind of Americans, it's like really they don't need to know. Many of the issues that the deep state is trying to get us to focus on, and the whole line of questioning, Jim Acosta and others of, saying, well, trying to get Trump up on, well, the Russia collusion, what did you say, or Trump being involved in subversion, or kind of like picking on these tiny little things that really don't matter that much to mainstream Americans. But the issues that really do matter, such as, well, is there a significant percentage of politicians in the United States that have been involved in satanic practices or pedophilia, or have been corrupted in other ways that leads to the U.S. Political process being compromised, that the electoral process has been compromised. The caravan from Central America up to the U.S. border, has that been deliberately contrived by foreign internationals such as George Soros? Those are important questions, but yet the mass media just ignores that and goes for all of these kind of really, I think, contrived issues that are aimed at undermining the Trump administration. And, I think people really kind of, if you look at this objectively, it's like, well, why are so many in the mass media trying to get people to focus on these trivial non-issues when there are so many important issues that need to be examined?
Just like you said, the caravan coming from Central America or South America, coming right now in Mexico. George Soros is handing them money and food. And yeah, I feel really sorry for the children and the families, but people forget that there's a lot of cartel members, there's a lot of MS-13 gang members, and there's a lot of terrorists that are within this caravan that are trying to seek asylum because that's the easiest way to get it. As a matter of fact, there's a mainstream movie, Sicario, Day of the Soldado, which essentially talks about the cartels shifting from bringing drugs over into bringing humans over. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, Michael, about QAnon, and I know both of us cannot answer this question because a lot of people have been writing this. Who is QAnon?
Well, there hasn't been any clear answer to that. I mean, other than people being pretty satisfied that QAnon is a group tied to U.S. military intelligence, and that this group operates within the White House and has very senior level access to key parts of the White House. So QAnon has dropped photos showing Trump's office in Air Force One, showing the Oval Room in the White House, taking photos of areas that only someone with high-level access to the Trump administration would have. And that's the sort of thing that military intelligence would have. And Q has released a number of posts, again and again, kind of like emphasizing the processes of the military intelligence community. So those are hints that I believe point to QAnon being a group of military intelligence officers that are in some way related to the Trump White House. Whether they're there to kind of like provide security or over signals intelligence and so forth, because the White House has always had the Pentagon provide a kind of core of officials to kind of help security in terms of military grade level security, to prevent intelligence infiltration of the White House, make sure that the communication lines are secure. So it may be intelligence officers related to that who are kind of like moonlighting by dropping all of this information as well. There is a group within the military intelligence community that is, I believe, directly associated with QAnon, but we don't know any particular names of anyone. Some people say that when Q uses a particular designation, or when Q signs off as like Q plus or D5, that may actually be a message from Trump himself, which is very possible, because I'm sure, as you were saying, Trump at these rallies points to Q, people wearing QAnon T-shirts or memorabilia or anything like that. He points acknowledging QAnon. So I think Trump is in on it. He knows that Q is his way of fighting back against the deep state, because the deep state, this is what they did from the very beginning, is that they began linking classified information to undermine the Trump administration. So Trump, being famed for being a counterpuncher, he does the same thing in return. So he then gives the authorization, the go-ahead, for a group within his administration to start leaking information. And they're going to do it with Trump's blessing, using the kind of terminology of QAnon and with the backing of the kind of military intelligence community, because this is how Trump is fighting back against the deep state, fire, fight, fire type thing.
One of the posts that Q made that was to me the most convincing, and I believe this was either May or June, was a picture of Trump on, now we know it's an iPhone, since Trump uses iPhones and is the very first politician to do such, because apparently Blackberries are the thing in the hill. And Trump is clearly on this device, and QAnon sends a picture via his Twitter account, and I believe he posted it on QAnon.pub, and it's a picture of Trump. You could see his eyebrow and his top of his face and his eye looking at some device. Immediately right after, Trump posts something on Twitter. I don't know if it was about North Korea or whatever it was. And then immediately Q follows that tweet with his own tweet that says, "What a coincidence." Now, somebody argued to me that this has to be the Marine that stands outside at the Oval Office. Well, really, I highly doubt a Marine who salutes the president and sits sentry in front of the Oval Office is going to whip out a smartphone in the Oval Office, take a picture while Trump is on his iPhone using Twitter, and sending that out. I highly don't think that's ever going to happen unless it's someone that, like you said, is clearly high up and isn't within the inner circle. Other suggestions of who Q is Trump himself, but I don't think that's the case. Others are like Kellyanne Conway, John Pompeo, but whoever it is, Mike, we both know that it's somebody who has not only the knowledge, but speaks in such a way as to not violate national security.
Well, that's right. They are very careful in not handing out any kind of classified information directly. They leave breadcrumbs. They kind of point to things happening, and that's their way of kind of showing that they respect the kind of national security and the classification process, and while they are leaking information that does come from classified documents or classified sources, they aren't doing it in a way other than just getting people to kind of like reach conclusions themselves based on the breadcrumbs that are dropped. And there's a perfect example of this, which is one of the things that really attracted me at the very beginning to QAnon as a legitimate source, and that is on January 6th of this year, QAnon put out a number of posts talking about a DEFCON 1 situation that was not going to be real, that it was basically a false DEFCON 1 situation. And what Q was alluding to was the false missile alert that happened in Hawaii on January 13 of this year. So basically, this is a great example of how QAnon operates, where they'll drop breadcrumbs, which is classified information that is, there was intelligence showing that there was a planned nuclear attack against Hawaii, and that somehow this would be involving some kind of fakery. So Q posts that on January 6th, and then 6 days later, you have that false missile alert. And then later, we get sources saying that, well, this was not a false missile alert at all, that this was actually a DEFCON 1 situation that had been averted. And I talk about that on my site in terms of several ways in which, several posts where QAnon has basically said that this was a false flag attack. But, all of that is kind of like classified information, but Q releases it in these kind of cryptic ways so that you, the reader, can figure out yourself exactly what Q is telling us.
Exactly what you said about dropping crumbs. I remember when this happened in Hawaii, and a lot of people were able to stream it on Facebook or at least record it or even on YouTube. And there was pandemonium. People were literally panicking, thinking that, hey, there's going to be a nuclear missile strike, whatever the countdown was in Hawaii. And clearly it was averted. But this goes to show again what you were talking about, these false flags that seem to happen regularly with the deep state to sort of keep us in line, because if you keep a population in fear, then it's easier to control. Now, Michael, I've asked this question to a few people and they don't know it. I'm sure you might get it. And this is for all the listeners out there, a little piece of trivia. Do you know where we go one, we go all comes from?
Yes, the movie about the young kind of Navy cadets. Maybe you want to kind of tell the story?
It's on the bell written on JFK's yacht. And so when all the leftists, Democrats, are saying, oh, this is a right-wing conspiracy, they forget that it came from a Democratic president. And I'm sure you know this, Dr. Salla, because Q has even mentioned this, that every single day in the Oval, they pray for JFK. Am I right?
Well, to me, that would be very indicative of exactly the kind of person Donald Trump is, that he is very deeply patriotic. He was friends with I know he was friends with John F. Kennedy Jr., and I know that he probably was aware that JFK Jr. was killed, that was a murder. That was not an accidental incident, his plane going down.
It was a murder, because he would have been president.
Well, and Q actually, this is one of those posts from Q actually connecting the JFK Jr.'s murder, the plane crash, with Hillary Clinton. And when you look at it, it's very clear that JFK Jr.'s death the person who benefited the most was Hillary Clinton, and that's a fact. I mean, that's just right there. You know, you just ask the basic question. Well, you know, when something bad happens, who benefits? Well, who benefited from JFK Jr.'s death? It was Hillary Clinton, because JFK's death cleared the path for Hillary to win the open Democratic Senate seat in New York State, because JFK Jr. was seriously contemplating running for that, and if he had ran, he would have gotten it in a shoo-in. Clinton wouldn't have had a chance. So right there, you know, you have the Clintons involved in the death of the murder of JFK, and you know that just kind of follows on the role of the deep state. I mean, I wrote a book called Kennedy's Last Stand, where I talk about how the deep state assassinated John F. Kennedy, and you know why they did it. And I think Trump knows all about this, and so yeah, I would not be at all surprised that you have prayers in the White House every day for the Kennedys.
There is a question here from the chat. This comes from Free Cosmos, who I know is Tom Schaefer, also known as Miami Tom, and another nickname he's got is Tommy Shutter. He asks, Dr. Salla, how do you know Q is not a very skilled psyop? The best psyops succeed. Keep that in mind, is what he wrote, word for word.
Well, I think the fact, some of the things I've already mentioned, that the fact that QAnon, people wearing QAnon memorabilia, shirts and so forth, Trump points to them at these rallies. That you've got all these photos that have been released by Q showing the Oval Office, Trump in the Oval Office, or the pen used by Trump to sign executive orders. Trump's office on Air Force One, again, the same thing where you show Trump's shadow or aspects of Trump. And then the information itself, for example, as I mentioned, this incident in Hawaii where 6 days before, you had Q posting information that there's going to be a DEFCON 1 situation which will be averted or will be covered. So right there, you have advanced knowledge that there's going to be some kind of event related to a nuclear attack against the United States, which will be averted. And sure enough, 6 days later, you have the missile alert in Hawaii. So, when you add all these things together, I think, the conclusion is that QAnon is the real deal. This is not a psyop. This is the military intelligence community acting under the authority of President Trump to leak information to expose the shenanigans of the deep state, which is Trump's way of retaliating against the deep state, which has been using classified information to undermine Trump. So Trump's a counterpuncher. So he's using classified information against the deep state, just as they're using it against him.
And I definitely agree with your answer, Dr. Salla, for a couple of reasons. First, just like you said, that the access that Q has to Donald J. Trump, I don't think anybody, wherever you're working in the West Wing, is going to have that sort of access to be able to take a picture while Trump is writing on his Twitter account. And then what are the chances that you would be able to take a picture of Trump in the Oval, send that out, Trump tweets, and then immediately Q tweets? What a coincidence. That, and also what you just said, Michael, about the fact that when Trump goes to rallies, he acknowledges Q. That is why I think he's such a big story and why I wanted you to have, because for those of you who have heard past interviews with Dr. Salla leading up to the last two we've done now and the first week of September when we talked about Q, we were always talking about his Exopolitics Institute. But Q right now is a very important topic because of the fact that we are in literally the fight of our lives. Do you want to see the Constitution ripped underneath you? We already have domestic spying. The the NSA whistleblower Bill Binney, which you guys and gals have yet to hear, but I will air that soon because I had to pre-record him being in Europe. There's just so many things going on now, and it's ironic. You watch movies from the 90s like The Siege, or with Denzel Washington and Bruce Willis, or Enemy of the State. They are alluding to things that are going to be happening now, which are happening now. Now, Dr. Salla, let me switch to something major. I think one of the reasons QAnon, and correct me if I'm wrong because this is just pure speculation, is because of what Jerome Corsi and poor Corsi and Stone, two friends of mine who are both dealing with Robert Mueller right now. Stone, as of end of September, has lost over $500,000 in negotiations. But Corsi wrote that book, Killing the Deep State, about Hillary Clinton rigging the election. If Q is accurate and things fall in place as they should once Mueller is gone and the special counsel, all of it's dissolved and it's all over, that we will see indictments of people like Hillary Rodham Clinton, her husband Bill, President Obama, John Brennan, James Comey, Christopher Steele of the MI6, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. There's about 20 to 30 people that are really corrupt and had their hands in rigging the election and blaming it on Russia. I hope, because Dr. Salla, you can confirm this for me if I'm mistaken, but hasn't Q said that he will tell people who he is before Trump's out of his office or right after that? And the other thing is, isn't one of the main goals of Q to keep people aware and to keep the possibility of Hillary Rodham Clinton and all these other people being slapped in cuffs and being brought before a military tribunal? Because I believe she should answer for her crimes. And I hope to God that this happens soon under Donald Trump's watch.
Well, that is how Q first came into the public awareness with these posts in October of 2017 talking about the secret indictments or the sealed indictments and the upcoming arrests of key figures involved in corruption. And Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation was a prominent part of that. You also had, as many people are aware, the kind of fallout from the WikiLeaks release from the presidential campaign in 2016, where the Podesta emails pretty clearly showed that there was something really sick happening involving these key people within the Clinton campaign. John Podesta, her campaign manager, using all of these coded words, all these coded pizza words, which the law enforcement community has for a long time associated with pedophilia. All of the whole kind of Pizzagate scam. So, right there, you had emails actually showing that the high-level official people within the Clinton campaign was using coded language, suggesting that they were involved in some kind of pedophile practice, and even worse. And then you have pictures by Tony Podesta, John Podesta's brother, and John Podesta himself, which was kind of shocking to me. Pictures of cannibalism, pictures of children being abused, kind of like really sickening photographs or pictures in their homes, and the whole kind of Maria Abramovich, kind of the spirit cooking thing, where they use all of these kind of like all of these kind of black magic elements in their cooking process. It's like something truly sick was going on here, and I think people were really wanting to know, well, what's the truth here? And so when QAnon started saying that this is all being investigated, that people indictments are being set up, grand juries are convening, and that eventually charges will press, people started to kind of like really embrace the Q information, because everyone wanted to know, well, when is the kind of rubber going to hit the road here? Because the wheels have been spinning for a long time, we're hearing all of these people saying, yeah, the Clintons have been caught doing all of these terrible things, and all of this pedophilia is going on in Washington, D.C. So when are things going to take off? And we're still waiting for that. I mean, that's been over a year now. Now the count of sealed cases has risen over 60,000. The majority of those are indictments, and we're just kind of waiting for that to all be unleashed. And it seems that we're probably waiting for the new year to begin, because that is when the reforms of the court martials regulations for the military go into effect. And apparently the sealed indictments are going to be unsealed, and there are going to be joint cases involving the U.S. criminal justice system and the U.S. military code of justice being used against people that have been doing all of these different crimes. So, we're kind of all waiting to see what's going to happen, but, probably not much is going to happen until early in the new year, when we can expect the kind of new Congress being convened, and then things will be unleashed.
You brought up an important point, and before we get to the most recent points, I do want to talk about this. You mentioned Tony Podesta, John Podesta, having pictures of them with children being abused, cannibalistic activities, and the whole thing with Pizzagate. There is a lot of people that are involved in politics that wear pedophilia jewelry or rings to identify themselves as such. Then you have Epstein, Charles Epstein, with Epstein Island, the billionaire pedophile island, which regularly shuttles people on the private jet Lolita 1 over there for people such as the Clinton. Bill Clinton has gone there regularly, Prince Andrew, and a whole host of other people have gone there to abuse these minors. And I'm talking about minors as in like not under 16. I'm talking about ages 5 to 11, which is really sick. Now, we talked about the reason before, Dr. Salla. Can you again remind the listeners why pedophilia is used in politics?
Oh, great question, Dr. J. I mean, one of the best books or sources for anyone to go to is by John DeCamp. It's called The Franklin Cover-Up, and it details how pedophilia and kind of satanic abuse of children is used to compromise politicians in Washington, D.C. And John DeCamp's book has the evidence. It has a lot of interviews with children that were caught up in these terrible abuses. It has interviews with law enforcement officials. John DeCamp was a state senator for Nebraska, and he was actually involved in law enforcement in in Nebraska. So, this was someone who had done a lot of work to detail the extent of the pedophilia practices and the child abuse of children as young as 5, 6. I mean, they were using young boys from, I believe it's called Boys Town there in Nebraska, and they were being brought into and used in these pedophile rings, taken to Washington, D.C., where these young boys, as young as 5, 6, were used to compromise politicians. And you can understand exactly why this would be devastating. Not only are we having children being abused, but you're also having a high-level corruption of the ruling political class in Washington, D.C. And if a young, aspiring politician, such as Barack Obama, let's say the name, right? Just say someone like that, takes a liking to a young boy, they have that all filmed, and then they can use that against him. And that person can be elevated very quickly through the political system. Now, I want to be clear now. I don't want to say that Barack Obama was named in the John DeCamp book, but there are stories about Barack Obama and he's being involved in some kind of unsavory sexual practices. So, it does raise the legitimate question, was he part of this process? But nevertheless, I think, there are a lot of politicians in Washington, D.C. that have been compromised in these kind of illicit encounters with young children. And this is a systemic way that the deep state corrupts the political class.
And what better way than to have these future politicians be victimized as children, because statistics show that if you are sexually abused as a child, then usually that's one of the traits that has you being a sexual abuser as an adult. So if they're abused as children and then they become adults, and then if they're abused as children and then they become adults and then they abuse children paid for by the good old US of A's, I don't know who's paying for it, DNC or whoever, sending him to Epstein Island. Well, now you have all the blackmail you need against them to get them to fall in line and do whatever you want them to do. And what a way for the deep state to keep these people in control and always recycle people. Because sure, you could say, oh, well, the Bushes were Republicans, but the Clintons are Democrats. Yet you see them hanging out all the time as if they're part of the same club. And that's why I made the big difference, or the differential statement at the beginning, where I said it's now no longer Republicans versus Democrats. It is the deep state versus Republicans and Democrats. Now, let's talk about some before we get to the first break, since the after that we're going to be literally spinning on the posts. But the midterm elections, I honestly thought that we would have maintained the lower house. I know the Republicans picked up a lot of, thankfully, Trump candidates. Everybody that when Trump goes and holds a MAGA, Make America Great Again rally, and he is helping someone campaign, money cannot buy that sort of power. It's not just a presidential endorsement. He literally is doing something no other president has done by continuously holding these rallies and promoting people. Now, did you see if Q wrote anything leading up to the midterms, or what has he written since the midterms? Because, Michael, I'm starting to feel and fear that there may not be much done until 2020 after Trump is reelected, and I could put money on that, folks. I'm pretty sure, unless Mueller really screws things up for him, which I don't think he has a ground to stand on, by the way. But assuming things don't get screwed up, I do think he will be reelected. And I'm hoping that in 2020, when the 2-year term of the congressmen and congresswomen is up, that we might have a chance to flip the lower house and have it Republican again, or not just Republican, but non-deep state Republican. So what did you see about Q writing leading up and after the elections earlier this month?
Sure. Well, leading up to the elections, Q was saying repeatedly that the elections are safe, that, and referring to a red wave. And so people assume that that the House will be safe for Republicans and the Senate as well. Well, what we had, the final outcome, is kind of like a mixed outcome, because there was both a red wave and a blue wave. You had a red wave in the Senate where the Republicans actually picked up seats. So now they have a 53 to 47 majority, and it strengthens the Republican majority. And also, you have some Republicans, like John McCain and Flake and Corker, that were kind of like opposed to Trump. So Trump never really had a solid majority in the Senate, but now he has, because they've all been replaced by people that are solidly behind Trump. So Trump in the Senate, he can actually move forward on nominating people for key cabinet positions, for the judiciary and so forth. Now, in the House, you had a different outcome. Of course, we know the Democrats retook the House, but there were a lot of anomalies. There seemed to be some kind of systematic voter irregularities, especially in Orange County, where there were there were people, Republicans were losing in Orange County, despite the fact that at a kind of, I think at the governor level or at a high level, they were voting Republican, but apparently they were voting Democrat when it comes to House of Representatives. So kind of like there was something really weird going on, and Q has said that basically, and this is afterwards, that this was allowed to happen so that the people involved in election tampering, the Democrats that allowed this, that they could be outed, they could be exposed. And so now there are investigations, and that this is presumably again where you're going to have these people swept up in the grand jury investigation and investigated. After the midterm elections, Q dropped several posts basically saying that the importance of the election was that essentially now the Senate is going to take up the ball. That that the real investigations were always going to be in the Senate, and that now because the Republican majority in the Senate is guaranteed, those kind of rhinos that really were opposed to Trump have been removed. So now the investigations that were launched in the House are all going to move over to the Senate, so that the Senate's going to run with the ball. And QAnon was saying that this is a good thing because the Senate has more power in terms of investigating these kinds of abuses. Because the senators operate under a 6-year timetable, so it gives them a little bit longer to kind of like really get into the meat and gritty of these kinds of investigations, as opposed to the lower house, where every 2 years people have to go through re-election, and so they spend the last year of their 2-term elections like getting ready for the next term. So it kind of diminishes from their time to really seriously investigate issues.
One thing that Roger Stone was able to say, and I'm glad you brought up Orange County. In Miami, I believe the 2 counties that Roger said was Broward and Miami-Dade, and I could be wrong about that, but he said that there were more people who voted Democrat, or I hate to say Democrats because they no longer use democracy. They're socialists, so I just say Dems. But the Dems, there was more votes from the Dems than there were registered Dems, and that right there is again just goes to show the tampering. And like you said, to what Q said, to let this happen. And I think because once all this corruption is finally exposed, and once these indictments are finally handed down, and for those people out there who think these are just going to be for the high-end people, such as the former president of the United States or the former Secretary of State, I don't think this is going to be local PD coming knocking on the door and politely putting them on handcuffs. I think that this will be high enough to involve military tribunals and being court-martialed and literally being arrested by some sort of the military branch. I could see that, of course. We'll all come to find out what happens then. Now, I'm going to take us back in time, Dr. Salla, from now until the end of the show. And I know we're going to cut through a break. But regardless, this is what my focus is I was hoping that we could talk about the Q posts that you might remember since we had you on, which was September 4th until now, and then, of course, the most recent ones. So do you recall at least any memorable ones without having to look back of what was being said in September?
Sure. Well, there was a very important post on around September 5, September 6. So that would have been immediately after we spoke, where this concerned the Senate confirmation hearing for Brett Kavanaugh, and this was a dialogue between him and Lindsey Graham, where Lindsey Graham basically asked him, at this time, is it legal for the U.S. military to try civilians, U.S. citizens, in military trials? Is that legal at the moment? And basically, Kavanaugh pointed out that, well, because of the 9/11 attacks and because of the legislation that basically declared that America is at a state of war, that Congress passed an enabling act, that basically said that we're at a state of war, that authorized the Bush administration to launch military encounters or military expeditions against Afghanistan, and also with regulations or with executive orders that have been passed afterwards, showing that the U.S. is under a state of emergency, in terms of international corruption, human rights abuses, that it actually is lawful for U.S. citizens to be tried in military courts in the United States. And that was very important because that was basically really a shot across the bow of the deep state, showing that this Judge Kavanaugh is going to be someone that supports the constitutionality of these court-martials of deep state officials that have been exposed for corruption, high-level abuse of children, treason, sedition, all of these charges, which many of them can actually be tried in a military court. And that's soon after that, that's when all hell broke loose, where these women came forward and started to accuse Kavanaugh of sexual harassment when he was a teenager or when he was in college, really, which on their face value, I mean, if it really did happen, it's the sort of thing that happens often in college. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that, young men do this kind of thing in college regularly. But the fact that it happened, just a week before or 2 weeks before Kavanaugh was going to be voted on in the Senate, stunk to high heaven that this was actually contrived. And as it turns out, it was completely contrived. And this Betty Ford that actually appeared before Congress to lay out her claims, deliberately lied before Congress. They asked her questions, and some of the questions were very specific, saying, well, have you ever been involved in coaching people to pass lie detector tests? And she said no, but it turns out that she had. She comes from a CIA family. And so, to me, this was pretty clear that she was kind of like a CIA asset being deployed to basically damage Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing. And there were a number of others, other women that came forward. Again, completely contrived. So Q was basically saying, and there were posts after this that were affirming that Kavanaugh was basically forewarned that this was going to happen, that the deep state was going to go after him with all of the tools, all the covert assets that they had at their disposal to try and prevent him from being confirmed, because the deep state are in a panic, because if Kavanaugh was confirmed, that would basically cement this 5-4 majority of conservatives on the Supreme Court, and Kavanaugh's opinion that the Constitution allows the military to try citizens in military courts during a time of national emergency or a time of war. That was the big issue that the deep state was concerned about, and that's why everyone now is waiting to see what happens in early January when the amendments to the military court-martials regulations go into effect, and then the U.S. Military, the Judge Advocates General's office can start trying some of these people that have been secretly indicted in military courts and cooperate with the criminal justice system in clearing this tremendous backlog of 60,000 sealed indictments that are out there.
Speaking of Justice Kavanaugh, I gotta say, I really, really feel sorry for him. And like you said right before, he's about to be confirmed. These women come out of nowhere. And Christine Blasey Ford, when her lawyer asked her to take that polygraph, I believe it was two questions. I mean, literally, come on. They didn't grill her. When did this happen? Or do you remember this accurately? No, it was just the most basic, absurd polygraph test I've ever seen in my life. And before we go to break, let me point this out to you, Dr. Salla. I recall afterwards that Cory Booker, who had his Spartacus moment, which really upsets me when I see that, was even accused, but not by a woman, but by a male who bothered him for sex in a bathroom. And here's the sad part, Dr. Salla. I don't see the deep state mainstream media attacking him the way he attacked Kavanaugh. I mean, if this person had gone to two lawyers and just wanted people to know that this person, Cory Booker, was in fact, not just a sexual predator, but a gay sexual predator at that, yet you don't see it in the mainstream news. It's pretty sad. What's your take on Cory Booker and what happened after?
Well, that again kind of brings us back to this process where you have the deep state compromising politicians with all of these kind of lewd sexual acts with children and promoting them and getting them into high-level office. And so Senator Cory Booker, I mean, he might well be an example of one of these politicians that was identified early on by the deep state as someone that had a proclivity for kind of like homosexual behavior, and they compromised him with some young boys, and so now he has become a predator, and he's rewarded by the deep state in being kind of progressed through the political process. I think he was mayor for a major city in New Jersey. Now he's the senator for New Jersey. And so this is the process, and it's totally corrupt. And of course, as long as these compromised politicians follow the talking points that are sent to them by their controllers, then they're safe, or they think that they're safe. But of course, QAnon has been telling us now for some time that all of the communications between these deep state operatives that thought that they were safe in being able to share information in this kind of through various online fora, online communication systems, that in fact that the NSA was spying on them, and they have all of the goods on all of these compromised politicians. So, Cory Booker and others like him, I think many of them are being given the choice of, well, you can go through the process of being exposed and having your name basically be caught up in all of these grand jury investigations and indictments that are unsealed, or you can retire. And I think many politicians and corrupt officials within the Department of Justice, within the FBI, have chosen the path of retirement rather than being named and being discredited. And that's, again, one of the things that Q has emphasized again and again, that prior to the sealed indictments being unsealed and the prosecutions moving forward, it's imperative for the Department of Justice and for the FBI to be cleaned or cleansed of all of these deep state assets that have been infiltrated. Because unless you do that, even if you do unseal the indictments, because the FBI provides the kind of investigations for these, laying the case for the prosecution, and the Department of Justice provides the prosecutors and the judicial system for prosecuting people. Unless that's cleansed, then these people can go off scot-free. So that's why it's important to have the Department of Justice and the FBI cleansed first, and then the indictments being unsealed.
Now, let me just make one comment before we go to break. Speaking of departments being cleansed first, this is what I believe why Trump put Mike Pompeo first in the CIA to be the director of the CIA. Clean house there, and now he's at the State Department. I would not be surprised if he cleans house there and moves to another department. With that being said, folks, stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple short minutes. Much more with Dr. Michael Salla, PhD, on the most important topic involving President Trump 45 in our day, the fight of our lives, QAnon. Again, folks, before we go to break, let me just say this. Where we go one, we go all.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hello everyone, my name is Derek White Sky Cloud. I'm a psychic medium and paranormal investigator, and my show is called Between Two Worlds Radio on the LNM Radio Network. I'm on Tuesday nights from 9 o'clock to 11 p.m. Come and join me on the Pacific Time. We talk about the paranormal, alternative health, and other subjects that can actually mess with your mind. And you can join us on the LNM Radio Chat Room. Come and listen. We'll see you there.
What happened to the good old days when people were loyal and we all had fun without drama? Where every Saturday morning at 4 a.m. Eastern, we invite you to join Encounters with the Nearlies and discuss endless topics and throwbacks of the yesteryears, bringing back to you retro interactive radio to the fullest. And yes, you got it. It's Throwback Saturdays with your hosts, Dr. Darryl and Dr. Katie Neely, turning back the hands of the Father Time and bringing people back to a place of peace. So get down, get sassy, and get jiggy with us. Oh, just don't drink while you're listening, because we are not responsible for the damage that comes from spitting it out while you laugh. So join us on Encounters with the Neelys, exclusively on the LNM Radio Network.
Grace has some pretty stellar arms, like Serena Williams good, but her face is pretty disgusting.
Someone please tell him to go back into his closet and leave us alone.
Britney's face is so stupid and I hate her so much. It's like a scientist created her in a lab to annoy humanity and didn't even do that good of a job.
Megan reminds me of a troll doll that came to life intent on killing us with her stupidity.
Why is Grace's head so big? It definitely has nothing to do with how smart she is and probably everything to do with how bloated she is.
He's so funny. Just kidding. Who would find this disfigured flamingo funny?
Never post a selfie of yourself. You look so ugly.
The only reason you have so many views is because we think you're a freak and we can't look away.
Megan is the main reason that the world sucks so much.
I would rather get cancer than listen to another Trevor Moran song.
You are a mistake. You should have never been born.
Drown yourself in a shallow puddle, please.
Wow, I hope she's sterile.
These really stopped being funny a long time ago.
You're so much more than the things that people say about you.
Those people have no right to say cruel things to you to make themselves feel better.
It's okay that you sound different than everyone else.
That's what makes you so special.
We will not tolerate it.
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 Every day, people make me feel like I stand out simply because of the way that I look.
Every day, people make me feel small.
Every day, I face the cruel words of bullying.
And every day, people tell me that I'm brave for enduring this humiliation.
But we're not the brave ones.
It's the ones that say no to the bullying.
The witnesses.
If we all join together, there's nothing that we can't do. We will no longer be the silent majority.
When we see bullying online,
We will let the world know that we're going to take action with the eye.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
Our actions will overpower cruel words.
I am a witness.
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 There is power in words.
But it's nothing compared to the power of the actions that we put behind our words.
Visit eyewitnessbullying.org to learn more.
I am a witness, and so are you.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
We have ignition. Strap in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, welcome back to the second hour of Dr. J Radio Live. As you know, I am your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, and we are broadcasting internationally. And just for added kicks, we have a guest live from Hawaii, in case you caught us late. And of course, we've been talking about a very, very important topic now, QAnon. All over the web, the media, all over, well, not the mainstream media, of course, all over the non-mainstream media. And we seem to have lost our guest. So let's bring him right back and see what happened there. But he is all over the internet, all over YouTube. Praying Medic is one of the decoders, and one of the great decoders that posts on QAnon regularly is my guest. That happens to be, in case you caught the name late, Dr. Michael Salla, PhD, live from Hawaii. Dr. Salla, you back with us?
I am. Aloha.
It's aloha to you. Yes, and to you, it's actually still sunlight in Hawaii. And now, as we were going to break, we were talking about quite a few things with QAnon and the very sad case of Kavanaugh, and of course, the deep state trying to keep him out of the Supreme Court for many reasons. Filibustering, if I believe is what term they were using, to do anything to delay him until after the midterms. And honestly, Dr. Salla, if they had the ability to delay Justice Kavanaugh literally until another president was in office, I'm sure they would have. I'm really sure they would have. And that's a very, very scary thought. What's your take on that? Do you think they would have actually delayed him until 2020? Because Michael Dukakis, when he was on the show last time, without a doubt, he even bet money on it off air. He says, I will, bet my Harvard degree. I will bet $1,000 that 2020 will see, I hate to use the word Democrat, but he says a Democratic president will be in office. The people he suggested is Biden, Booker, or, she used to be called Pocahontas, but Elizabeth Warren. I don't think none of them stand a chance when it comes to Trump, especially in light of these times. But I just thought I got a little, giggle from what he was saying. Now, usually I hold back from where my political stance is, but I've been pretty vocal since Donald J. Trump's been on. And when I do have some politician who is from the left side, of course I treat them with respect, but the fact that he is so sure that Elizabeth Warren or Cory Booker or even Joe Biden will be the next president, I think I can't do anything but laugh at that. And one other thing that Dr. Salla, you can comment on, is very sad. I have never, ever in my life have seen or have read in the history of the United States a president who just finished his presidency out campaigning for his party in such an aggressive mode and saying negative things about the president. Usually a president finishes his term and usually they go back into a quiet life, writing books and maybe giving speeches, but never do they come out and criticize our current president. Have you seen this, I guess, fear on the other side where they're jumping up and trying to pull every trick out of the book like I have been seeing?
Well, that's right. It's very important to point that out, that it's unprecedented for an American president to, not only come out against the current president, but to kind of continue to live in Washington, D.C., and kind of like almost shadow the president in his international travel. So it's like you've had Obama, arriving in places before Trump or shortly after Trump to kind of like really, I think, to reassure the political elite in that country that the deep state is still in control in the United States, and don't worry, Trump is a temporary aberration, and that soon enough the deep state will reassert, its control over the U.S. political system. And I think that really, Obama doing that is indicative that he himself has been a long-time asset of the deep state. And I think you can go back, to Obama's family being CIA assets. I mean, his mother, the kind of activities of his mother, and Obama himself, when he was at college, being involved in various kind of activities which kind of like suggested that there were CIA links, shows, I think, to my mind, and to anyone that's objectively looking at all this, that that Obama is basically doing all of this to undermine Trump because he's following an agenda that is laid down by the deep state, and that they're using all of their covert operatives or assets through the CIA and the intelligence agencies of other nations. And that's a very important part for us to talk about as well, is, what role did agents within Britain's MI6 and in Australian Security Intelligence Service, what role did they play in the basic setting up of these FISA court warrants to spy on the Trump administration?
Now, for those who don't know what FISA means, it's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And a FISA court, which I actually didn't know the full details until I spoke to the NSA whistleblower Bill Binney. He said that the FISA court judges are all appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, in this case, Chief Justice Roberts. I don't remember which building he said they actually are in, but they are on the 7th floor of some sort of building in DC. When people hear the interview, you'll be able to know exactly what he's talking about. But Dr. Salla, you and I both know this. This is the scariest part about FISA courts. The defense does not know. The Constitution does not apply, specifically the Fourth Amendment, warrantless searches and seizures. FISA, the act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, was meant, again, for foreign intelligence surveillance, meaning to spy on terrorists, etc., without a warrant. But when you use that on an American citizen and subvert the Constitution and its amendments, then we have a real problem, because not only has the FISA court, the whole act in the beginning being wrong, but now being used on a future president, and then after he was elected as the president-elect. That is really, really freaking sad. And it really chills me down to my bone to know that. What's your take on the fact that FISA courts even exist, and the fact that the defense doesn't even know?
Well, that is a part of the lawful process underway in the United States for espionage to be conducted against individuals that might have foreign connections that are doing things that might promote terrorism and so forth. So, you can kind of like connect FISA as a legitimate act to try and protect the United States from future terrorism, where, you have organizations like Al-Qaeda trying to infiltrate the United States, and whether people are compromised in that. So that's kind of a legitimate security interest. But what happened with the FISA court applications was that the FISA court was basically misinformed and actually lied to by the lawyers for the Department of Justice, who are basically all their FISA court applications are pretty much granted. I think there's very few, if any, cases where the judge rules against the Department of Justice prosecutors that say that they need warrants, or the intelligence community that say they need warrants to kind of like spy on particular individuals. But what's expected is that the information presented to the judge in those FISA court applications is accurate, that there's no omissions, there's no inaccuracies, there's no deception to fool the judge into granting the warrant. And that's exactly what happened with the FISA court applications, that the judges were told that these individuals in the Trump administration or the Trump campaign, and then later on the administration itself, that they were somehow compromised by foreign actors, and documents such as the Steele dossier, which was actually contrived by a British agent, former British MI6 agent, who was paid by the Clinton campaign, by opponents of Donald Trump, and also that this was done to do opposition research. So the Steele dossier is a product of opposition research paid for by the Democratic Party against Trump. So that was used as a legitimate document in the FISA court applications. And what makes it, not only egregious because this was something that the judge should have been told, that this was actually a product of opposition research and paid for by the Democratic Party or the Clinton campaign, but that also the British and the Australian intelligence community were involved in actually the Steele dossier being put together and it being put through the FISA court applications. And this is one of the things, some of the posts that Q put out in September, that basically that Britain and Australia, the intelligence community, were in a panic over this, because Q was showing or was dropping posts saying that this collusion of Britain and Australia in undermining the Trump administration through these FISA court warrants, granting the NSA the authority to spy on the Trump administration, and then that intelligence data being leaked, through the intelligence community into the mass media, was all done to undermine the Trump administration. That rather than Russia being involved in collusion to subvert the 2016 election, it was Britain and Australia's intelligence services that colluded with the deep state, with the Clinton campaign to undermine the 2016 elections. And so the deep state is in a panic, because once the rank and file intelligence community in Britain and Australia know that their intelligence services were used by the deep state to undermine a friendly power, the United States, they'll be up in arms. So this will lead to a cleansing not only of the United States deep state, but also deep state assets in Britain and Australia will be exposed, which will then lead to a cleansing of the deep state in those two countries. So these are some of the posts that Q was dropping in September, basically showing why the deep state was in a panic over these, over all of the intelligence communications that the House Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee and the House Judiciary Committee, that they were going to release all of these FISA court warrants or applications, that was going to expose all of this, and that's why the deep state's been panicking.
I really hope that all these FISA court warrants and everything involving them is finally released, so we can finally see the gravity of how our judicial system, and it's not really our judicial system because the Constitution does not apply, which makes it really a one-sided court. There has never been not one case in the history of FISA courts that was not granted in favor of the government. Every single time the FBI or the CIA with one of their lawyers presents a case to a FISA judge of why the surveillance with unconstitutional surveillance should be done on a certain subject or citizen of any country, they always win. They always win. And that, again, is another thing that is just sad and violates our Constitution. Now, there was something that Q talked about for quite some time, and I do have a question about it. It has to do with Rod Rosenstein, or as Roger Stone calls him, Rat Weaselston. But the point is also with Jeff Sessions. I kept seeing the words optics only. And I really thought Sessions was one of the good guys, but then he stepped down right after the midterms, and then we have acting Attorney General Whitaker, who has publicly stated that he will find a way to shrink the budget for Mueller to end this so-called witch hunt. What do you think about what Q was saying when he was talking about optics when it comes to Sessions and Rosenstein? Because I really thought Sessions would not step down.
Right. Well, with Rod Rosenstein, I think he was and is an asset of the deep state, and he was someone that, of course, is at the center of the whole Mueller investigation in terms of authorizing it. And then what he did, which is not well known, was that he expanded the scope of the investigation, which kind of made it, rather than a narrowly focused investigation on the charge of, was the Trump administration or was Trump in any way involved in collusion with Russia to affect the outcome of the 2016 election. Rosenstein was instrumental in expanding the terms of Mueller's investigation, so that he could basically conduct a free-range fishing expedition looking for any way to kind of like dig up dirt on Trump that could be used to undermine him. And of course, there was always the question of, whether Trump would sack Rosenstein because Sessions had recused himself and basically was not going to do anything to rein in Rosenstein, and there was always the question of whether Rosenstein would be sacked, and I think the goal was to basically have Trump sack Rosenstein and thereby provoke a constitutional crisis, which the deep state would have played up to, for the rest of Trump's tenure as president. But Trump didn't take the bait, and Q posted a number of posts basically saying that Trump didn't take the bait. He didn't do this. He just let the process play out, despite the fact that the New York Times, which itself is a major mouthpiece of the deep state, yes, basically exposed Rosenstein as someone that was wanting to basically have Trump impeached, that he was prepared to invoke the Constitution and argue that there was a case for the U.S. cabinet, to remove Trump as president, that Rosenstein actually was on the record for promoting this kind of idea. And yet here he is getting this investigation underway using Robert Mueller against Trump. So there was an attempt here, I think, just before the election, to actually use this New York Times story as a pretext for Trump to sack Rosenstein, because he clearly had a case. Because here Rosenstein is saying Trump is unfit to be president. I'm going to go and get members of the cabinet to vote against him, to remove him as president under constitutional amendments. Clearly this was a case where Trump could be could be seen to be having solid ground for removing Rosenstein, but it was a setup. And Q said that this was a setup. Trump knew it was a setup and didn't remove Rosenstein from his office. And indeed, after the election, basically asked for Sessions to resign as Attorney General and putting in an interim replacement, Whitaker, who was appointed under recess, which is totally legal for Trump to do. He has the authority to have a recess appointment as the Attorney General, and so that Whitaker is there. And Whitaker has now removed. Whitaker has inserted himself in authority to oversee the Mueller investigation. One of the first things he did was he removed the authority that Rosenstein had given Whitaker that Rosenstein had given Mueller to expand his investigation beyond its initial mandate. Whitaker has reined it in, has removed that expanded that kind of expansion of authority, and so Mueller is now on a tight leash. And in fact, that is pretty much the words Q has used to describe Mueller under Whitaker. That Whitaker has now has put a leash on what Mueller can do. That Mueller has to focus on the original charge or the original investigating terms of some kind of collusion with Russia, and not to go on this expanded fishing expedition. So yeah, Whitaker has reined in Mueller already.
And I'm sure you know this because we talked about this last time. This Russian collusion is a big fraud using John Brennan's CIA program called UMBRA, UMBRA, which has the ability to basically leave a digital fingerprint or watermark, whatever you want to call it, from any nation or their respective intelligence services. So they have over 500 in their database, and the collusion was not with the U.S. or Trump and Putin or Russia or the FSB to get Trump in office, or to flood people with the missing emails that ended up in the hands of Julian Assange. No, the only collusion, as you mentioned, was with the US and UK's MI6 Christopher Steele. Using Umbra, they blamed it on Russia. So this just goes into this entire witch hunt again by Mueller, and I do hope this comes to an end soon. And people like Mueller himself, who is deeply involved in the deep state. And Dr. Salla, correct me if you know this, or tell me if you know this or not, but Rebecca Roth, who's the premier 9/11 researcher, was talking about the terrorists that were all over CNN, the 19 so-called hijackers. And some of them were to this day, are Saudi airline pilots, and they had to sue the United States for defamation because their pictures and names were all over the world, yet they're alive and doing well and in Saudi Arabia. Mueller is the one who picked these people. He picked their pictures and names and said, there's your hijackers. And that just goes to show how deeply involved and how sick he is in the head. Do you think, by the way, Trump will pardon Manafort, since that is part of the news? And to tell you the truth, Dr. Salla, from the moment that the special counsel, the team Robert Mueller was using to prosecute Paul Manafort, I knew without a doubt that Manafort would not be sitting in prison as long as Mueller expected, or sadly, life is one of the things he's expecting to, or what's possible with the sentence. And even now, what's going around the news lately is that the plea agreements to cooperate with Robert Mueller has actually fallen apart with Manafort because he's been communicating with Trump's lawyers. So this is just pure speculation unless Q has talked about it, or has Q talked about what's going to happen to Manafort?
Well, I think that strategy here that Trump is following, as far as Q has revealed, is to kind of clean up the Department of Justice and the FBI so that these sealed indictments can be unsealed and then the prosecutions begin. And as the prosecutions begin, as all the evidence comes out, that all of these contrived investigations, such as the Mueller investigation or any kind of attempts by the deep state to use people, former Trump associates, to kind of undermine him, these cases will all be dismissed under the kind of fruit of the poison tree legal doctrine, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. That you cannot use information which is tainted to prosecute people. So that because the Mueller investigation, that was all premised on poisoned information, that the whole FISA court and the whole kind of Russia collusion was contrived by the deep state, and as you know, as we've already mentioned, that rather than Russia, it was actually Britain and Australia that were involved in collusion to subvert the 2016 election. So these are close allies of the United States, and that they were basically trying to ensure that Hillary Clinton would win the election. That this is how the deep state operated. So as that all comes forward, I think what will happen is that a lot of people that are collateral damage, and Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Corsi, I think that they're all collateral damage, and as all of this comes out, all of the charges against them will be dismissed or expunged if they've been convicted of anything.
Now, other posts that Q has been talking about, what has he said in the last couple weeks, and what can we expect to see? Because one recurring theme, as we've talked about throughout this show, is Q leaving crumbs, people putting together the dots, and then things happening. For instance, you mentioned what happened with the DEFCON 1 in Hawaii, in your native state, with that missile, and he posted about it 6 days before. So in the last couple of weeks, what have you seen him talking about, and have you seen anything that he's talked about, say, weeks ago that has happened in the last week?
Well, yes, there has been Q has pointed to this upcoming House Intelligence Committee meeting where John Huber is going to be appearing. He is the prosecutor, the Utah prosecutor that Jeff Sessions appointed to investigate all of the alleged abuses and crimes that the different House committees were concerned about. So back in fall of 2017, John Huber was put in place to start investigating these, and John Huber has the investigative authority or power of the Inspector General's office of the Department of Justice behind him. So that basically what happened was that John Huber has for over a year now been investigating all of the concerns expressed by the different House committees about the Clinton Foundation, about Hillary Clinton's abuse of emails, and all of the concerns expressed by the different House committees. He's been investigating those and convening grand juries to bring about charges. And these are the indictments. These are the sealed indictments. So, to date, we have like over 60,000 sealed cases, the majority of which are indictments, and the vast majority of those indictments have been a result of these grand jury investigations that has been convened either by John Huber or other federal attorneys working with Huber under the authority given to Huber by Jeff Sessions when he was Attorney General. So now, in this House Intelligence, I think it's House Intelligence Committee. I'm not sure if it's Intelligence Committee or it could be the Judiciary Committee, but one of the House committees is going to have Huber appear on December 5, and that is the date that Q has been pointing to as being when all hell is going to break loose, that this is when the public is going to learn for the first time exactly what Huber has been doing. And, all of the rumors about 60,000 sealed indictments, this is, we are going to learn whether or not any of that is grounded in reality. Because so far, all of the evidence that we have about the 60,000 sealed indictments comes from alternative news journalists and private individuals going through PACER records, identifying all of these sealed cases, which, to have 60,000 in a calendar year is incredibly unusual because the average is 1,000 in a year. So, what is that? What is the process behind that? People have been speculating. Q has been dropping posts saying that this is what the bulk of those secret indictments, sealed indictments, involve these kinds of investigations, the matters that Q's been talking about. But now on December 5, for the first time, Huber will go on the public record and say, well, what has his investigation of the Clinton Foundation, what has that found? And have there been any recommendations for prosecutions? And has there been a grand jury kind of investigating this? And so this is when things are going to drop. And we're going to have a lot of confirmation as to whether everything Q has been saying for the last year, whether that's grounded in reality or not.
And I do hope these indictments come because it'll finally show that these people who believe they're immune and untouchable are not so untouchable. People who think that they can use the CIA to rig an election, or FBI, or all the things that was going on in 2016 and even now with the deep state. People in America need to understand the reason why QAnon is so important is because we are at a very pivotal point in our lives, Dr. Salla. Either if the patriot, Donald J. Trump, is not able to fight off the deep state and we fall into the hands of them as them governing the United States, the New World Order is so close to happening. I mean, you have the EU, you have the new bloc forming of China, Russia, and whatever other alliances there are. Clearly, the United States controls the North and South American continents. And then, of course, you have what killed Colonel Gaddafi trying to start the or the African Union. Well, combine those four, what do you have? Or five, you have the New World Order. And again, this is why these next 2 to 6 years are so darn important. Now, let's talk about some of the most recent messages. We have about 15 minutes left before I want to get your plugs in. So I'm going to spend this time, and while you do that, I'm going to see if anybody has anything in chat. So the question I would have to ask you is, what other posts have you seen in the most recent days, and maybe even today, that you flagged as important?
Well, the one that really got my attention was a post in September where Q actually referred to secret space programs. So this was a post that occurred on September 18, September 19, where QAnon responded to questions asked on the 8chan forum about Roswell, about secret space programs, and Q chose to answer those questions. And his answers were basically that the Roswell incident has the highest classification, that we are not alone, also referring to secret space programs. So kind of like really confirming that the deep state has been involved in those issues for some time, which is part of the kind of exopolitics work that I've been doing. But the interesting thing that I found in this was that QAnon organized or arranged for this kind of for this session on the 8chan board where people would ask any questions they liked, and Q would pick the questions that kind of like fit in with their agenda. And so by answering these questions about Roswell, extraterrestrials, secret space programs, what Q was telling us was that disclosure of those issues is part of the Trump agenda, and part of what Q wants to reveal out there. So basically, this is what people like myself have been really hoping for, and why we've been big supporters of Q, is that we see Q as being kind of like really opening up what the deep state has been doing for decades now. And when you expose the deep state corruption, the manipulation of politicians, and what they've been hiding, that as a consequence of all of that, then you're going to have all of this deeper stuff that has been buried in very highly classified programs. That is going to come out too, and that's involving secret space programs, extraterrestrial life, and so forth. So, the fact that Q is on board with that agenda and is suggesting that the Trump administration is going to play a role in that agenda raises really interesting questions about, who exactly, what exactly does Trump know?
Yeah, and back to something we didn't say this time, but we said last time, QAnon, anonymous, that's where the anon comes from. Q, for everybody who doesn't know, is the highest clearance a civilian can get, and this goes back to the AEC when it existed, the Atomic Energy Commission. So therefore, people like Bob Lazar, when he said he had a Q clearance, he was a civilian, and he was dealing with, again, what he talked about, the craft that he labeled as the sports model at S4 in Area 51 was nuclear powered by element 115, which, again, I'm not a physicist, so I can't tell you the details, but essentially has total annihilation, meaning that all of the energy is used. So therefore, QAnon, I believe each president has a Q clearance. And is that true, Dr. Salla, or is that just speculation on my part?
Yes, they have to have Q clearance because they are given authority over the nuclear codes that are used to launch a nuclear attack. But when we're on the whole issue of Q clearance and what does Trump know, I mean, it has to be pointed out that Trump's uncle, John Trump, was a professor of electrical engineering at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that his specialty involved him being the person being asked by the FBI to investigate Nikola Tesla's missing papers, or the papers that were taken from Tesla's archives shortly after his death. And that in the 1980s, John Trump told his nephew, Donald Trump, a lot of things about the work that he had done involving Q clearance-related information. So I think, and I've written an article about this on exopolitics.org. People can go there to find the article on John Trump and the president. But basically, I think John Trump told his nephew, Donald, about the secret space programs, about the advanced technologies concerning free energy, faster-than-light propulsion systems, and alternative healing technologies, because that was another thing that John Trump was involved in. He was involved in health-related issues in terms of how radiation impacted health. So Trump was told all these things by his uncle decades ago. So now he's president. He knows all this stuff of what the deep state has been hiding. So this is why I believe Trump may well turn out to be the disclosure president.
And I'm glad you actually were able to tie in those two topics together, because I've been actually waiting for Q to talk about this. And I actually had a debate recently with a strong Trump supporter, a friend of mine, who was, sadly, considering I was not I wasn't around at that time. I was under the weather for a long period of time, but he's the one who introduced me to Q, and I started paying close attention and started watching the videos, and that's when I noticed that you were producing videos. I was like, wait, a great friend that knows a lot about this. I had been, he said that Q said, oh, there's no such thing as aliens, and we are alone, and what you see is Air Force, and I thought that's just a big crock. And so for Q to actually be acknowledging this is a big, big step forward, Dr. Salla. I mean, that is massive. Now you have somebody that the president acknowledges. You have a president who's been well aware of certain things. And now you have Q, someone who's connected to the president, acknowledging it. So like you said, I think he is going to be the disclosure president. People said Hillary was going to be it because of John Podesta. But I don't think that would have been the case, Dr. Salla, for multiple reasons. First of all, this is the dynasty queen. I mean, she's so corrupt and has so many secrets. Why would she tell something that major? Why would she want to lose control of her population? And speaking of Hillary, I know she's trying to contemplate a third run. Her age and her health and her 30 years of lying to the public, I think, have finally caught up to her. I would just sort of laugh to see if the Dems spend another $1 billion to help her run, but hey, I guess that's up to them. Let me ask you 2 questions from the chat as I scour them, considering we do have 5 minutes before I start to wrap things up. Mary Trotter, there's 2 questions, so I'm just going to tie them together. Asks, where is Q? And where is information you've all gotten to wake up?
Well, I guess that question, where is Q? I'm assuming it's like, where do you get the drops? Where do you read the drops? And where I go is just QAnon.pub. That's where I go to kind of like get all the drops. And there are many people decoding the drops, and so people can find that, but that's where I go to get the drops. And I don't know if that answers the question.
I believe so. I was just going to say, I go to QAnon.pub, and I also on Twitter check QAnon. I think it's at QAnon76, but obviously QAnon.pub is the direct source, and I think that's exactly where I've been going, and I believe that's where people who follow QAnon look first. And when you mentioned there are a lot of people that are decoding and talking about Q, the 2, honestly, Dr. Salla, that stick out to me that I pay most attention to is Praying Medic, although his videos tend to be a little long, and you. When I want to get the fastest update and the most in-depth update that links up what's been happening, I'm not talking about, say, okay, there's a post today and you just talk about today. You will link up things that have been talked about in the past. And I think that's really important because Q always encourages people that when he's not posting or she's not posting, to follow the crumbs and link them together. And that's something that you do. And I want to thank you for your service, because people are not just paying attention that are United States citizens. People around the globe are paying attention to Q. Now, in the next couple minutes, I don't see any other questions unless someone pops up recently. A lot of them are comments about Q and U.S., and we do have some people here in the U.K. actually asking more questions and being more fulfilled about what you're saying. So what has Q written today? I guess since we got a couple minutes left, I'm going to start to focus on that.
Well, I do want to kind of like just mention that one of the things that I think is particularly important about Q is that we really have 2 visions of the New World Order. One vision is what the Clintons wanted, which was going to be a centralized global order under the authority of the deep state, using the United Nations as a kind of fig leaf to control all countries, and that everything would be regulated by a central supranational institution like the United Nations. the other vision of the future world order, which is the BRICS alliance vision, which is multipolarity, where you have different major nations such as China, Russia, India, Brazil, kind of coming together and creating this multipolar system where authority is not concentrated in any one institution, but it's actually shared amongst all the major nations. So it becomes much more of a kind of consensual process. And I think this is what Trump's election meant, was that he was going to basically bring about a world order based very much along the lines of multipolarity, where the United States sovereignty would not be subsumed or merged into this grand kind of like supranational entity run by the United Nations, but he would work with other major nations like Russia, China, Brazil, India, and so forth to create this kind of like a kind of consensus amongst the major nations in how the world ought to be run. And that's why the deep state wanted to sabotage Trump and Putin ever having a fruitful dialogue, because that's where this kind of this type of multipolarity world order would come about.
Yeah, and that's actually a really sad thing, because Trump has wanted to have a friendship and a friendly dialogue with Vladimir Putin long before he was elected. This is something he talked about. And then, of course, that meeting in Helsinki, and it just seems that the deep state is continually sabotaging that relationship. And I would only think, because if they create an enemy, again, it's going to go back to what I was saying earlier. If you have the United States has an enemy that causes fear amongst the population, well, what easier way to control them? Dr. Salla, we have run out of time. We have literally 4 minutes left to the end of the show. I do want to get you to plug in your statements. And for all those listening, believe me, this is not the end of the conversation with Dr. Salla about Q. I've asked him to come on at least every other month to talk about this, because there's so much, and there's going to continue to be so much until one of three things happen. Q's identity is revealed, Trump is out of office, or those indictments that we've been talking about will finally be handed down. So before I ask you for your plugins, at least for today, Dr. Salla, if you have any closing statements, any thought, any topic that we have missed about QAnon, what would you say?
I would say that Q is really pointing out the challenges of cleaning up the system, the corrupt system in the United States, and that takes time, that this is a methodical process, that trying to clean up in the 2 years that Trump has been president, a system which has been corrupted for decades, is not an easy thing to do. So people have been very impatient, that they say, well, you know, the indictments haven't been unsealed. Is this real or not? They're losing faith. That Q has been saying, trust the plan. And I think that, yeah, let's kind of like give Q the benefit of the doubt, trust the plan, and let's see what happens between now and the early part of January, when these sealed indictments should be unsealed, and we should have something happening next week with the Hoover giving a report to one of the House committees about his investigations into the Clinton Foundation.
Well said. Now, before we run out of time, let's talk about where people can follow you, your Exopolitics Institute, as well as where you continually release videos talking about QAnon and his crumbs.
People can just go to my website, exopolitics.org. That's where I normally post articles and the videos talking about Q posts, and the links are there, and you can subscribe to my website or to my YouTube channel, which is just Michael Salla. So yeah, I would just recommend people go to exopolitics.org and see what is available, because when there is news from Q that I think is very relevant, then I will post that. I'm not the most frequent poster on QAnon out there. There are people that post every day, but certainly I follow it. And if there's something noteworthy that I think is relevant to this kind of deeper picture of exopolitics, then I will post on Q and do put out a video as well in certain times.
And again, everybody, I highly suggest you do follow Dr. Salla. Like I said, I've been friends with him, and he's been a guest on the show since I started it almost 6 years ago, but I've known him for 6 years. A very intelligent person, is always ahead of the game when it comes to what's going on with extraterrestrials, the government's involvement, and right now with QAnon, especially since this show, we've been able to link the two. And honestly, Dr. Salla, I've really been waiting for that. Now, I want to thank you again for doing the show. Please hang on for a quick moment till we get off so I can talk to you after the show. Like I said, folks, he will be back on. And also, if you go to my website, drjradiolive.com, drjradiolive.com, if you look under Dr. Michael Salla's bio, you will find the relevant links to his website. Remember, folks, I say this every show because I'm trying to drive the point into you. The only thing you have to remember when it comes to the show is the name of it, Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. Every single social media account from Patreon. By the way, folks, if you go to Patreon, you will get some extra benefits that you don't normally get just from hearing the show for free. Also, Minds.com. That is a new social media platform that pays you in cryptocurrency, Ethereum-based tokens that can be used for cash or for other reasons. So I suggest you create an account there, and I will leave a referral link on my Twitter. Everything else from Facebook, Steemit, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Google+, I mean, you name it, Pinterest, whatever, YouTube, BitTube, all of it is all at Dr. J Radio Live, at DRJ Radio Live. Remember, tomorrow is Friday Flashback. It'll be my 5th interview ever from April 18th, 2013. While you guys are enjoying that, I will be out celebrating my birthday. With that being said, folks, all I have to say for tonight is where we go one, we go all. This is Dr. J, and I am officially signing off.